Many of you know client success maybe as a kind of a big part of the community or content, but we also are a customer success platform. We do everything from new to renew, helping you get visibility, automation, the integrations you need with your other data systems, namely CRM and product usage, to help you get the most out of your customer lifecycle and your most important asset with your customer base. Obviously, we'd love to talk to you if you'd love to learn more. We won't dwell on this as we are here today to hear from Jeff. So we're going to be diving into implementation and, more importantly, how it can tie to, the most important commercial outcome in our businesses, which is revenue. What is implementation's role in revenue? What are some common misconceptions? What are some new things that Jeff has seen in his work? We've obviously been selling in this space for a few years, and I aim to give some perspective with the teams we worked with as well. So really looking forward to that. And again, look forward to your comments and interaction throughout. So with that, Jeff, I'll give the screen share to you and we'll kind of get things started.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I remember how to share my screen here. There we go. And to the old slideshow. Awesome. So thanks, everybody. I'm Jeff Kushmerek. Congrats to Dave for getting the pronunciation right, which isn't easy, but thanks for that. And so a big passionate topic of mine, I call it, is actually the name of a book that I think the joke I've been using is like the last Guns N' Roses album that took 15 years to come out. That's how I feel about this book right now. I just keep updating it and tweaking it based on work that I'm doing and everything. But I'll be getting that out over the next couple of weeks or so. I'm super passionate because this is the first part of the customer journey and it's the most important. I literally just got off a call with one of my clients and we were just talking and she was like, it's just so important. And she's the CCO. And I labeled it like a marriage, right? If you went on your honeymoon and you got, pulled, I see Haley's in Costa Rica, like you get pulled over the side of the road on a dirt road and, robbed and stuff like that. That's not the best way to start your marriage, right? And so if you started your implementation on a very bad note, it just kind of sours the relationship and everything like that. So, I do like to start this with a story, and if some of you had heard, have been part of, I did one or two of these a year or two ago, but I like telling the story because it really covers a lot. I call this almost like worst case scenario, and then I sort of in the rest of the presentation go through and talk about like, hey, how to avoid this? Like, so I have like, here's how to fix the current situation, and then how do we make sure that we don't have this happen in the future. So again, fire questions away. I don't have the chat view or the Q&A based on the view I'm in right now, so I'll rely on Dave to just interrupt me and stop me when I'm talking.
Yep.
As some of you know, I'm half Italian from Boston, so I can get a little carried away and fast talking. Drink a lot of coffee, so I'm counting on Dave to slow it down when I need to and stop me and explain if I have to. So I appreciate that. Awesome. So I call this one Project Never End. I also might call this one, make sure you ask all the right questions when you're interviewing at companies, because I walked into a company to run the post-sale team and immediately got pulled into a lot of implementation problems. This story that I'm telling, I probably heard 4 times over the first 2 weeks from different customers. The implementation was 8 months late. The product was sold at white label, but there was actually nothing that the services team could do to customize it. These features were also promised by the CEO in the sales cycle. Just a note, if you're like in series, seed and Series A and things like that. Sorry, my phone thinks I said Siri, not series. Your founder's CEO this might happen a lot, right? They would say, yeah, we'll build it. They have this vision for what the company will be. And sometimes they hear stuff like, oh yeah, well, we have that, we're going to have that. And, because they're just used to stuff getting built when they ask to. No services team to build these features. So you're depending on the product development team. The development team didn't want to build those features because it gets in the way of the roadmap. The customer, this one I was super concerned about. The customer was very rude to the CSM and the implementation resources. And the customer was also paying for 2 vendors, which is a big point that I hear a lot when I'm talking to customers, and why it's important to treat this like a real project and a real business. So the quick fixes that we put in, and then I'll sort of walk through on how to fix this to make sure that it doesn't happen systematically, is, first of all, everybody on the inside, on the internal stakeholder team, needs to get aligned. Like all those things I pointed out about dev team didn't want to do this and sales XYZ, you need to hash that all out, and you need to say, hey, are we going to keep this customer? If so, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And this is what we did on this particular thing. So everybody got aligned. Yes, we will keep this customer. We will do what it takes. We will stop core product development if we need to. And what we wound up doing is that we got a percentage of the development team allocated to work on the features. So we made sure that was aligned. We hired a project manager. At this time, we kind of did like a temporary that wound up becoming full-time. This company had a lot of you had your CSMs, and then you had your configurator type people who were kind of doing some quasi coding and things like that. And there was nobody who really knew how to project manage. And if you're at this early stage of a company too, you're also making sure that stuff is getting built in product and the development team as part of your implementation rollout. And this is actually very common. I go in and talk to a lot of companies in the stage, and they say, oh, we're so broken, and this particular situation happens. I'm like, this happens, this is normal. This means you're starting to get some more traction in the market than, maybe even at an accelerated rate. So you're getting customers that are a little bit above your playing weight because you have good products, but you just haven't sort of rounded out the features and things like that. So again, that's a positive thing to look at. You just have to figure out how to make it happen. So once we had our internal picture kind of taken care of, everybody on the product team, customer team, everything, we're all in alignment. Now that you're in alignment, now you go talk to the customer. So there's no finger pointing, right? And I can tell you that we sat down first of all, and we said, like, flat out rule number one, we don't tolerate rudeness, right? You're being rude to the people who all they want is for you to go live. So we basically said, it's me here and the CEO. You can't go higher unless you go to the board. That's not going to happen. So you want to vent, call us up. Don't call up the people who are working super hard to get you live. And just if you're a leader or if you're on these teams, like, you should never accept rudeness from your customers at all. It's not tolerable. We're not in that type of world anymore. Not that it was correct back in the day either. We agreed basically, okay, the customer wants to shut their old vendor down. They're essentially really harping, and as they should, we're paying for you and we're paying for our old vendor because we're not live with you yet, and we thought we would be, so we're paying for 2 vendor services right now. And so we got to this point of like, well, what do you actually need to go live? Well, what are the features you need to be able to shut that vendor down and transition to us? It wound up being about half of what they were expecting. And so we put together a plan that said, here's what we need to get to essentially like an MVP state. And then after that, you can shut the vendor down, and then we can then start rolling out the rest of the stuff that you need. For example, you might not need complex analytics your first couple of weeks out of the door. And that was the example with this one. Like, there's not even enough data for that. So let's push that for a few weeks later and not hold up the initial release. So we all agreed to the launch date, right? So this is the date that we're going to do. These are the features that were needed. And then you draw a line, and a line in the sand. I don't know exactly what you want to call it here, but basically, like, that was whatever was said. We're not talking about the past anymore, right? This is where we are. These are the features that we all agreed to. So if you come back 2 weeks later and you say, hey, we need X, Y, and Z, and like, remember we had that chat, like, let's put that on the backlog. And no more like, oh, we heard in sales X, Y, and Z. Like, this is it's a total reset button. And I actually really recommend, you don't have to be in this state to do a reset. If a customer is asking for a lot of revisions, you feel you're like on this never-ending project, you can have this meeting anytime over the next week and say, let's all agree to everything that you need, right? Because if we're talking SaaS and implementation, we still need them to be live. You want them to feel good. You don't want them to hate their experience. You can't project manage them to death, but you do have to have a little bit of a non-subservient position that you feel like they're just going to say, I want this, change this. And then those don't end. Those projects literally never end. And so this is how you sort of get to that point. So this customer actually went live, took about 3 months. And then the rest of those sort of features were rolled out, and they wound up being a case study. We talked about it in marketing posts and things like that. I don't think it took a little while to get to reference calls, but they started seeing their outcomes, because that's the core thing. You want them to get to the outcomes that they're looking for. All right, I'm going to move along. Just got a little sip of tea here, and then I will push along for how to prevent this from happening. And to get to that, I want to just cover off on some basics. If you follow anything that I talk about on LinkedIn, I'm very clear about a few things, and this is one of them. And this is this constant confusion between what is onboarding and what is implementation. I take a very black and white approach to this, a very almost blue collar approach. I was telling Dave, my dad was a plumber. I kind of view implementation almost like the plumbing part of the job. Like, you come in and you do this specific thing. And the reason why I don't like talking about onboarding and time to value and some other things that I'll get into is that onboarding is a little squishy. It's hard to track metrics against onboarding unless you specifically track like training sessions. But it can also last all the way through your first renewal and beyond. And when we talk about implementations, and if we get to metrics later, look at my clock here, hopefully we'll get to some of them. Onboarding is very hard to track on metrics, except for like training sessions and maybe LMS completions if you're at that stage. But if you think about implementation and rolling out a customer, and you say, hey, we've got a 30-day process, or we have a 90-day process, it could be 6 months process. I'm going to get into that in a few slides. You can track your metrics against that. Hopefully you have a standardized process, and you can track like if there's variance and why those were caused and things like that. It's easy to create project templates too. If you're at a SaaS company, you actually should not be in a constantly changing world of projects where you can't have a template in your work. You don't have, whether it's a G Sheet or you're using software and client success and things like that. You should be able to create a couple core templates. You might have a couple additions on a project or whatever, but to be white labeled and open up a requirements doc and say, hey, what do you want? That's professional services, and that's what we'll get into. But when we talk about implementation, very short into a company's life cycle, you should have a standardized process. I typically see small project, large project, and then maybe have something like, oh, it's an API only, or customer they're going to do it themselves, and we're just going to offer some assistance or something.
Hey, Jeff.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing, real quick, we do have a poll that I'll share in just a minute on how, folks on the call, how they define it at their company. Yeah. You mentioned onboarding can last through renewal. What do you mean by that? What are onboarding activities into the life cycle?
Absolutely. And this is where that's a great point, because it really helps define what I'm getting into here. Onboarding means, are you able to use the product to all of its value, essentially? Are you get to the value that you signed up for, outcomes and things like that? I want to use the example I talked about, like advanced analytics or something like that before. You might several months later get training on something. Your implementation should have been complete by that. I view implementation as in, you signed up for the service, you need the service turned on, you might need to import some data, whatever that it is the SaaS set up for a way that you can now use it. And I do focus a little bit more on like enterprise B2B SaaS and things like that. So maybe you're importing some data, or you've got some Zapier connections or things like that. But essentially, the software is being set up so that the customer can use it. So then it's usable. But does the customer? Yes, exactly. It's 50-50 split here. So that, let me just close this here. So that's what I'm getting into, Dave, essentially, is that you can keep rolling out features, or people can get trained on all, they can learn the standard way of doing things, and then get into advanced administrative things, and those can keep going on. You can have new users being rolled on. That's not implementation. The system was set up and it's live and usable and things like that. So
thanks. That's a good distinction, I think.
The last point I talk about here is customers don't care whether you call it onboarding or implementation. They want to know when we're live and when can we turn our vendor off, right? That's always been pretty clear to me. That's what they want to know. When are we live? How are we doing? Are we getting our money's worth and things like that? So whatever you call it, you know, they don't really care if you're calling it services or implementation or onboarding. These are the outcomes that they're looking for from that particular phase. All right. Oh, I gotta figure out how to advance here. Why is it important? I talked about it. First impressions are more than ever. It can make or break the confidence in your solution. I can tell you plenty of deals for some of the companies that I've worked for before that we would lose a deal in December, and then January 15th or 18th, a salesperson would come back to me and they'd say, hey, remember that deal we lost? I heard their implementation's going really bad, and they said if they can opt out of their contract and switch over to us if we can have our kickoff call in the next 5 days. And it can happen like that, right? And then salespeople don't want that to happen because they lose their commission and things like that. But worse, people just see your team is not able to get it done, right? So obviously, once they're onboarded, the more successful they'll be with your solution, the faster you can do it, the greater time to value you can provide the customers. I still think time to value is important. I just don't think it's a great implementation metric. And also customers, sometimes they have limited resources, right? So you need to be able to get them launched and loaded faster. I don't like having to rely on customers too much because they can take their sweet old time on things like that, and you got to manage through it. So I prefer like get their data, get the things that you need, and then give it to your team to go and configure, have them make some decisions on some calls, and hopefully get it all set up. And listen, I've also implemented HRIS systems that take a year. I know it's not that easy all the time. The other thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that your team has a lot of domain expertise. This might be your 5th beauty or wellness customer that you're launching. It might be your 5th financial services, or you've launched 10 customers just like that, and everybody's very copycat. Like, how did that work? What are people like me doing? And they'll rely on you. It's like for me, as I said, do I want to go do my own plumbing that I learned from like my dad 20 years ago? No, I want to go hire somebody that's going to go in and go take care of it in an hour. And they're kind of paying for that expertise as well too.
Jeff,
Lastly,
if I could, on the subject of expertise, it can often be a competitive advantage how your team implements and onboards. How are you seeing the teams you've worked on or teams you're working with put that in the sales cycle and effectively tell them?
Absolutely. Yeah. I just did this like twice this week. So again, on the competitive advantage, I believe you should make it real easy, and also so easy that your salespeople or hopefully your sales engineer can speak to it. So you put together, usually I have like a slide or two. I call it the 3 Ps, which I hate creating things with like acronyms like that, but people, proof, and process. We have a team. Here's some faces. And yeah, everybody likes seeing that little Gantt chart, which we all know we don't really use Gantt charts when we're really loading stuff out in implementations and projects. But yes, we know what we're doing, and then have some logos there of happy customers that that you've done it. So you've got your people with the faces, you've got your proof with the logos, and you've got your process. You'd be shocked at a lot of people that don't do that. I can tell you the amount of times somebody's called me up because they don't have any of this and they're trying to go get their first enterprise deal, and they have a call with a PMO and they're like, we don't even know what we're talking about. So they're like, how do we get through that conversation? So to be able to enable your sales team and say, this is how we do it, you know, sales team will go and they'll put the big Staples Easy button on it and all that stuff that they do. And that should be good to go. But I don't think you need to go too overboard. I do like having people from the implementation or CSM team as a part of the conversation they always help. And you can be a non-commissioned resource that asks a lot of great questions and answers a lot of questions. And they're not on any commission, they're just answering. And again, you've got that domain knowledge. Salespeople and sales engineers, they're not using the product every day. They're not implementing it every day. They're not hearing all of the use cases and things like that. So your team has a tremendous amount of value to add to the pre-sales team. And the most successful teams I've seen have used the post-sales team in the pre-sales. Awesome.
Cool.
Why can it be so hard? And there's a Q&A question. You can feel free to pop that in when you need to. But I will tell you, it's a hard gig. I've gotten let go of implementation when it's been really hard. So it's happened to everybody. And I remember that CEO is just like, it's the hardest gig right now at a company, especially when the product is not fully built out and you're having to build stuff and manage the product team and everything like that. So you're like, where I failed on that is I didn't create all the good internal connections that I needed with a development team and things like that. But some of the biggest reasons can be implementing when it's free, it's not valued. My dad used to say, free is his least favorite four-letter F word, and I subscribe to that philosophy. But it's not free. And we're getting to the New Year's, and then new year, new you, and people are gonna say this is the year I lose that weight. And if you download that free download to do what you got to do, you're not doing it, right? But if you sign up for that trainer for $100 a week, you're showing, and you've paid it, you show up and you're doing the work, right? But the other things, and boom, 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 in sort of a sequence here, you have no set duration, right? So you have no scope. So you can't hold the customers and say, we need this in a week or else we're not going to go live here. We just talked about CS not being involved in pre-sales, especially when you need to maybe look at a data file or look at a connector or see what their instance looks like. Not having good sales handoffs, this is the killer. Like if you don't have if you've got bad sales handoffs, they're going to start saying things like, don't you guys talk to each other? We've said this 3 times to you. They might get frustrated, and you don't know the core outcomes that they're looking for. I can say, you can, just on the note on the bad customer fit, you could have the best running processes in place and your team's amazing. If that's not a good ICP fit and they're not qualified, there's nothing you can do to fix that. So garbage in, garbage out, your sales team needs to get that together, which is super important to DOA customers fast, because if they're not showing up and they're not doing the things, you got to kick that right back to sales, and it's sales problem. If it's 6 months later, that's a churn that's going to hit your team, and you're going to see that on the post-sale side. And I always make sure I work that out with CFOs. Hey, listen, if we get a DOA within the first 2 months, that's a sales, that's a clawback. That's somebody's getting their commission pulled out. Somebody's driving around in a car that they can't afford anymore. So I talked about product roadmap dependencies being in a contract. That's super hard. It happens. It will happen to you if you're at an early stage company. So you have to make sure that you can manage through that. Customers with no sense of urgency, that happens if it's free and it's not valued. It also happens when somebody signs up for something and then they push it down like 3 levels below them. A CEO or a C-level person signs it up and then gives it to a manager of somebody, and then like, oh crap, here's another 15 things that I have to do or something like that. Execs saying, I don't care, just get it done. I've heard that a lot. Don't complain, just make sure it works. Like, okay. But I counter that with, I'm going to need your support in X, Y, and Z. And they're like, okay, fine. Like, and that's how I got that first story sort of worked through. If your team members and they're all implementing customers differently, that's not a great situation either. You don't know what works and what doesn't work. I agree that there's a little variance that may happen. But in general, your team should be rolling people out, and mostly 90 to 95% in the same way. There's always going to be variance. You're just trying to make sure your variance isn't 50%. You want it to be at more like 5 to 10%. And then just not having go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this goes into the question we have from the audience. So someone mentioned kind of taking CS department digital for the first time, but struggling still to get the product implementation process into current accounts. It's a newer department. What do you recommend as far as iterating to find, there may not be a perfect implementation process, but what are the iterations you can do to say, okay, I think we've stumbled on something repeatable here. What would you recommend to this person?
Yeah. So first of all, definitely been in that scenario a bunch, and I can say, I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's even if customers are going to be digital, it's not, unless you're a true PLG and the product is built to set up, where people are just loading files in or doing whatever and being self-serviced, and there's all the education there and everything. That's usually much further along for companies, unless that was their core focus from the get-go. So you still need to, company that I just helped out with, what we did there is for their digital customers, their first 30, 45 days were still with an implementation resource. They still needed to load data, get data files, do a little cleaning, build up the front end and things like that. And the customers don't have the ability to do that. So until your product is fully in a PLG manner, whether it has all the API calls that it needs to do, or whether all the admin and config options are available for customers to use, then you still try and roll them out in the same manner. You still need a template that you walk people through. Week 1, we do this, week 2, week 3, week 4, and then we roll you into the digital motion after that. And then if people are asking you not to do that, then you have to start coming up with all of the things that customers don't have the ability to do. And then the team has to essentially take a look at all those features. The dev team and the product team needs to see, is building that out going to cost more than other product market fit features that they need to do? And how much will that cost? And sometimes that can be multi-million dollars and then they look at the P&L of the implementation team and they're like, yeah, we're just going to have this be implementation right now.
Yeah, I'll add in, I'll chime in with things we've seen. So if you don't have, certainly the R&D budget to wait for product to help you with some of these more self-serve features or adoption features, one thing we've seen work well are teams that you could do tomorrow, set up a weekly webinar that says every new customer, we have an open weekly webinar. We're going to be walking through these sections of the product. It happens, 10 a.m. Pacific every Tuesday. You can use it in your sales cycle. Hey, this is something we do. And so you join every week, you record those sessions, you email them out. And then certainly, the CSMs, the implementation leaders, which you're probably already doing, record your own looms or your own screen shares and send a little packet across. And it can be as lo-fi as a few bullet points linking to some loom videos. Those are things we've seen work well to at least help the customers in the meantime until you can get a little more partnership with product. So that's an interesting, if it's more digital as well.
Yeah, so. Yeah. I've seen that as well too. And eventually rolled those all into like a LMS. You can go very low dollar LMS to, having these small videos and tasks to go do is a super way to get around some of this in the office hours as well too. I like, it's funny you mentioned the sales thing because we used to do that too. Like, oh, we've got the April cohort, but you got to sign up by March 15th, and then it accelerates the deal so that they're like can get into that April group, so they can all go through the same process at once, and it actually makes staffing a little easier because you don't have 10 customers in week 1 and 15 in week 5 and all of that stuff. So. All right, cool. I'll move along to the next one. Kind of speaking to what we were just kind of talking about a little bit, like I've created this implementation maturity model for customers. And I will tell you, after almost 25 years or so, most companies fall into this bucket or into this path, and maybe they jump 1 or 2 along the way. And I always see this. The first one, you've got just founders hacking everything together. That's like the first 5 projects, and then they're like, okay, now that we know, they're building product out to fill features out and things like that. But then they start seeing, no, this is actually how we roll customers out. This is how customers want it to be done, and this is how we have to do it with our technology. No team, there's no charge. Then they move into this next phase, and Dave, we were just talking about this before we went live, and it was just get them live, do whatever it takes. But usually your CSM's doing it all. Maybe borrowing some devs if there's some complexities that are needed. Pretty much $0, and you're using like G Sheets to bang through all these things, which is not scalable at all. But at least maybe you have a process and you're just copying that template over. That's better than nothing. That's better than just Dave does it this way and Holly does it this way or something like that. Then you get into this like point where the boards and the CFO are like, okay, just stop losing money, right? Like, you've got to, sometimes you see this, I've seen like $5 million revenue companies with like 20 people implementation teams. And you're like, okay, that's not scalable. So what you wind up doing, you create your own separate implementation team. That makes things a lot more scalable than having your CSMs do it. As we all know, that's like a bomb going off for CSMs. I got a poll question later on about that. You have a separate team, your fee attached to every deal, and you're hopefully using some onboarding software at this point in time, or implementation software. and the fees pay for the team essentially. And if you think about it, usually I suggest, maybe it's the cost of 2 months of your MRR if you're an MRR customer, or it's 20% of your ARR. But that's somewhere where your fees need to be. If your average sale price is your ACV for your software is somewhere in the 50K, 75K, I would expect like a 10 to 15K implementation package and go from there. Then you roll into professional services, and there's a great. Usually, it's funny. I cleaned up my desk, but I usually have this spiral notebook from Insight Partners, which you can go download for free, which kind of walks through a lot of these metrics that I'm talking about here. And the big move is you just start calling implementation professional services. You're a bigger company at this point. You're probably 30 to 40 million or something like that. And that's where you've got all these defined packages. You've got, you're very P&L and metrics heavy now. You probably tracking time. You've got a PSA tool and you're using partners for a lot of overflow work. And then at stage 5, this thing happens where suddenly you just start giving all this work to partners. You need partners. Partners won't sign up to do this until they can get like 40 hours of work for like 3 resources on a consistent basis. They're going to create a team and things like that. And then you have a smaller PS team that kind of works on either like the new software that comes out, or like the new big projects that you can't mess up and you can't give to partners or something like that. So.
Yeah, Jeff, I just spun up a poll of, does your company track profitability? Yes, we track it. No, we don't track this, or we track some, but don't know if we're profitable. 86% don't track it at all.
Yep. Expected, a little higher number, but to me, it tells me that people are maybe, just not they're in phases 1 through 3 right now. And
yeah.
It's
it could be smaller companies. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, go through the next one. How about this for a poll? I get you start typing faster, but maybe in the chat you can just type, yes or no for do you charge for implementation?
Yeah, let me spin up a poll real quick.
Okay.
All right.
I've done this poll 3 times this year, and I'm pretty sure what I know we're going to see here. So. And I'll start moving on to the next slide.
Okay, let me launch this. Do you charge for implementation? This is going to be interesting. Okay, here we go.
My guess is that this is going to be 40%, 35% yes, based on the types of companies that we have here. All right, so while that's happening, what's really great over the last couple of years is that a lot of data has come out. Boards and analysts and venture capital companies are working a lot more on this part of the solution. I'm actually working on a pretty in-depth report for a company right now around some of these. And but the reason why I love this is I was the crazy old guy for about 10 years talking about this, and they're like, well, do you have data to back that up? And I'm like, you just got to trust me. But now the data is out there. Greg Danes is great. I have a couple other analyst firms that I attribute the value, some of these numbers to. There are my speaker notes, which I can't see right now, but we'll try and make this available. But essentially, the key things that we find is that you get 20% better retention for companies that charge an implementation fee. And I have a customer acquisition fee goes down, but I didn't toss it into here, but essentially 37% higher churn for discounts, and 15% increased conversion for people when they have an implementation fee. So the data is there. For me also, it's about the customer knowing about the value. One interesting thing you can do, because if you're not charging and then suddenly you convince everybody and they let you just start charging, you're going to see it getting discounted a lot. Yep. There we go. Just like I thought.
You're right. Yeah, you've seen this before.
Yep. So The key thing that I usually say is like, we want the customers to know the value of the implementation. And so if a customer sees like $10,000 with a strike through on it, they still realize they're getting $10,000 of a value. And if they start ghosting or taking too long and everything, you now have a stick that says, listen, we're going to have to, we might have to, and I removed the story, but I had another story in here where I went through and I did this with a customer. I'm like, they were ghosting all their meetings and stuff like that. And it basically said, we're going to have to re-implement you and we're going to have to charge you that fee because Johnny over here is turning into a pumpkin at the end of the month and he's got 5 more customers that he's got to go spin up. But we won't charge you the fee and we'll keep Johnny on, but we just need you to send this file, this file, and this file, and not miss any more meetings. And I've never had to recharge a customer for implementation, but I've had this chat a lot. So so it's about that value and knowing that they can come back in and be charged. Yeah.
Jeff, we've got some 2 or 3 people are asking this. The classic sales will discount at end of quarter, end of year, and implementation is the first thing to go.
Yep.
Now, the say this is not good. What do you recommend how these people approach this, especially in smaller companies where we're trying to grow, but what do you recommend to these folks?
There's 2 things that I've seen work. One is the thing I just talked about, which is just make sure that it's a strike through and they know the thing and that there's an asterisk and it says basically we will charge you this if you're the reasons for being, you know, dramatically late and stuff like that. Again, you can't, as I say, PMP, if people know, you can't like over project manage the customer into submission and stuff like that. You can't be like, hey, that's a day in and day out delay and stuff like that. But if they just start missing a lot of stuff, you can have that conversation. The other thing I did was that we would capture it in the CRM as that's discounted, and it would still get credited towards our P&L essentially. So, and this is as we started getting into that, you have to be break even. And I'm like, I can't be break even if they're discounting it. I will tell you what not to do, and do not, because I've seen this, it's caused lots of problems. And you do not roll the implementation fee into the ARR because that causes lots of auditing problems later on down the road. It also sets you up for an immediate downgrade for the CSM. So essentially, if your deal is worth 50K and they roll in the implementation fee so they can split it up or, you know, or whatever, and they just count it as ARR or MRR, then suddenly that's 60K ARR, but when the CSM has to go renew it, now they're back down to 50. So, and then it just causes all sorts of auditing problems because there's like COGS and all these terrible CFO terms and auditing terms. So, you know, so my is don't let them discount. Don't let them roll it into the cost of the thing for financial reasons, and keep track of it. And you can show your CFO and your CEO at the end of the year, end of the quarter, and like, hey, by the way, we would have $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 more cash in-house because this is a instantly recognizable revenue. We'll have that much more cash. That could be a new implementation resource. So when you're like, we're flat out, we're super busy, we need another resource, here's all the projects we're working on, and they're like, oh, and then I'm like, by the way, we could have paid for this resource if we didn't discount all that. So maybe the top level answer that I should have just said is buddy up with your CFO and your RevOps people to make sure that this isn't happening.
Let me ask you this one, Jeff.
Yeah.
Another option I've seen a lot here is, okay, we may not completely remove implementation. Maybe we discount implementation. How do you feel about opt-outs and maybe pressures that might put on an implementation team? What have you seen with opt-outs? Do you avoid them altogether? Just curious.
Yeah, I avoid them altogether. It gets into that whole value thing. And again, it's really tough because a lot of what we're talking about happens when you're at early stage and the salespeople are they're not at the level that they need to be. And they view everything that we're talking about as holding the deal up, and, you know, they're afraid to charge the customer for more. So they're just scared and they don't know the value that you're bringing, and that the customers will actually appreciate a lot of this, or or they're selling to customers that they shouldn't be selling to. And so you do have to deal with these problems until you get to that point where I'm telling you they will replace that sales leader eventually, because they're not having to be able to have that conversation means they're not able to do lots of different things, including like scale out their teams and things like that. So
Last little question we had around this, and this is unique and maybe not as common, but someone's mentioning like, hey, our product is free, or at least freemium for a time period, and asking like, how do we get customers to move? I think that goes back to working together with the product team. What I've seen work there personally is you have to incentivize product and engineering somehow to tie into post-sale magic moments in the product, or stickiness in the product. Somehow you have to align teams to what's happening. If you're not going to charge for the first 30, 60, 90 days or ever, then there needs to be some sort of incentive for everybody to say, well, they need to take these actions in product. Jeff, I don't know if you've seen anything else there for more freemium.
No, you kind of hit the nail on the head with that. Like, that's it's a little bit of a different model. Again, free will, it's alluding to it's not going to be valued. So, we all seen these when we buy stuff online. You're getting a value of $30,000 or X, Y, and Z. Like, as long as people know like what the value is. If you're at that stage, that means that you're also at the stage where you're trying to get as many customers as possible signed up and successful. So it's not about profitability. It's really about getting people launched and live faster. And that's why I really harp on the fees, because people will be incentivized to move faster than if they're not incentivized. So I know we had a lot of topics to go over today, Dave. I don't know if we've covered them all, so I don't want to. I don't know if there's something on your list as well before I dove deeper into some other things here.
No, I think we're covering a lot of interesting things. Would love to, and I think you're probably getting to it. You touched on it in the beginning, but time to value versus time to launch.
I have that in the slide. Let me see if I can. Okay, let me do this one first, and then let's get to time to value, because I feel like this is super important, and it's kind of like a terminology thing, but like it looks like we're all at that stage that I was talking about based on the poll answers that I got. And I wouldn't think many of your teams should be called professional services, because if you're selling something and you're newer to the market, or you're a little cheaper and things like that, when a buyer hears the term professional services, their mind just immediately goes into customizations, expensive, scoping, just like pain, right? It's like why when we want to be sick, we always say, to your boss, they say they're not going to answer any questions if you say you've got like stomach problems, because they're like, oh, okay, I don't want to talk about it, right? Like, so, and I feel like professional services is like that. But also, and Dave and I were kind of like doing a list on the fly yesterday when we were talking about this, but like implementations shouldn't be custom. They should never be time and materials. They need to be well-defined, repeatable. This is how we do it. Fixed fee. PS is usually time and materials. There's scoping that needs to get involved, and that's what you're dealing with when people start calling implementation teams professional services. Suddenly, you're going to get asked to do a lot of customizations and things like that. That being said, right around that stage 3 of that maturity model that I was talking about, you start noticing that you're probably doing some of these things. And I listed out some services here, but there's a lot of different things where you can create some little professional services fees, but I wouldn't do them as like, we're going to scope them and we're going to time and material. I have all these little like 2 to 5K check a box on an order form for these types of things that you realize like, hey, we do this all the time because customers sometimes need them. Maybe we should just charge a little bit for them. And these are like, hey, doing a quick integration, maybe doing data cleansing, creating a portal, or just expert services where they're like, hey, can you just give us some, more time, more expert time to figure out some strategy stuff and things like that. Because as I said, your team starts getting that domain expertise. So that's the implementation versus PS. Let me get to the time to value. There's a lot of stuff here. So let me get to the, oh, by the way, this is the last poll that I ran on the do you charge for implementation. So we got, it was a little bit of a different poll, but as you see, most people don't charge. So they go from there. and there's some of the more data on the ARPU and the CAC, but we'll make sure this is available for y'all to have. So so on the TTV, wow, this is deep down. I would say, okay, send me, as you see, there's a lot of content here. Happy to go over and do another session, but on the TTV versus TTL, there is a slide on this, but I don't waste more of your time here.
Sorry, I don't mean to take us.
No, I actually got into it. This, as I said, it just jokingly got reposted on my LinkedIn by my marketing team this week and caused some hot and heavy conversations. I think time to value is a great metric. I just don't think it's a metric that you can have as a distinct thing to like KPI your implementation team on. And I have this thing on SMART and attainable goals, right? Like, can you track things in the SMART metric? And you can't do that with TTV because it's very squishy. And, and then we started talking, Dave and I, about like, this is how when product teams came in or marketing people came in, they're like, oh, your customer is going to have this epiphany somewhere during the implementation phase. And they're like, oh, I see the whole value. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been doing this shit for like a long time. That's only happened like once. And it was somebody saying like, wow, my data is really terrible. They had 7 different ways to spell snowblower in their product data. And this was a large home goods. You've been to the store many times on the weekends. And so that just doesn't happen. And it's hard to track this epiphany type moment. I'm getting value is subjective. Launch is not subjective. Launch is, hey, we roll out 100 implementations a year and we have a 30-day process and we hit that within 90 to 95%. And when it's not in there, it's usually because a customer has an issue or there's a product thing that needs to get done. And that is something you can do with TTL. You value, it may be a year and a half down the road. I talked about the case of an HRIS system that we're rolling out, and the customer was running payrolls through it. They were getting value through it. They were, but the other modules that are part of an HRIS were not done. It was a year-long implementation. And but they're getting value, but they're not launched yet. So it can work on the inverse of that as well too.
Let me chime in here. I'd love to kind of get some more perspective. And just to recap, I think most people know TTV, time to value, a little bit more of a subjective measure, usually something product marketing teams call magic moments in the product. They clicked here, they created a project for the first time, whatever it might be. Time to launch, kind of a clear defined, hey, we're done. We did our configuration work. We followed the scope. We're there. When I think of time to launch, assuming the implementation team has done everything as agreed upon and in their power and everything's ready to go, there is this real shift, and hopefully it happens early in the implementation, to customer accountability. What have you seen work well to hold customers accountable during implementation, but on that handoff, it's like, ultimately, we can't be side by side with you. Here are the things you need to do with your team. How do we hold customers accountable?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yep.
All right, so I was going to open up for some more questions, but a couple other things just to hit on for some of the basics here. Again, make sure your internal handoffs are legit. They're down, and I'm going to tell you, only I'm just laughing because I've done this like 3 times in the last month with companies. You wind up having to make RevOps your best friend and get your CFO on board, because at early stage companies that you're like, the only way this winds up working is to have the carrot or stick or whatever you want to do it. The salespeople don't get their commissions unless this handoff has happened, and that there should be some text in there about why they bought, what outcomes that they're looking for, not what features they're looking for, but what outcomes they're looking for. And these are success metrics. Those wind up going to your CSM. They create like joint success plans, and they hit on the value, not on the features, because you'll always lose a feature conversation. Somebody will come out with more features. You need to know why and what outcomes that they're looking to get. You can have a very easy Google form. You don't have to spend, a month in Salesforce or whatever CRM that you're using, but it has to be mandatory. And also your team should sign up for an SLA. Like, here's a concession point for you. You can, it's best to, sales and CS alignment. an implementation alignment, you say, listen, if you guys fill this form out and mandatory stuff, we will make sure we have a kickoff in X amount of days, right? And that's one way to look like you're meeting them in the middle and whatnot. When you have, and I know I said like 3 to 5 days, and some people start like freaking out because some people want to get into like their first meeting with the customer being like a full-blown requirement session. And that is not what that meeting is for. Something that I've done for several years now that's worked really, really well, especially for, I see a typo, that's worked really well, is that you have this sort of shoot for 20-minute kickoff call, right? Because I said sales people is probably there, maybe the champion's there and they're going to go fade away. But you basically have this thing. You walk through any like discounts and expectations and what we're going to need. You introduce the CSM as being the new primary point of contact. They might not be fully involved in the implementation, but that is their new person. You don't want to keep handing off. Like now your implementation lead's the central point of contact. Now the CSM is the central point of contact. Then they're going to go back to the salespeople for the renewal. They don't want that. They just want, one distinct point of contact pre and post sales. Confirm the success criteria, have them talk it through. This is what we're looking to do. Make sure you tell them you know what it is, but you'd love to hear it from their voice. Walk through the process that you're going to do. Here's our 30, 60-day process, whatever it is. Then give them some homework. This like readiness package I always, maybe it's like, hey, we're going to have a kickoff. We're going to have the first meeting in a week and a half, or, work that out. And in order to have that meeting, we need to make sure we've got your data or your Figma files or whatever specific thing for your software that you need. Project starts when the homework's complete. Schedule that next meeting. Suddenly you're off on the races. They've got tasks that they have to go do. And they know that in order to move forward, they need to go do those tasks and schedule that next meeting, because if that meeting's scheduled, they want them to show up and make sure that their work's complete and go from there. So those are some basics that I've seen that always work. That's some breathing room, some prerequisites as I went through. Make sure you've got some clearly defined processes. Really go for 1 to 3. I've gone in and looked in people's implementation folders, and I see like 25 different templates. And that means maybe you've got 5 to 6 different products. That's the only time I feel that is acceptable. Maybe you've got your SMB and your enterprise and your self-service, big customer, small customer, API versus full service, whatever that it is, but not 20 to 25 with, Jeff's way and Joe's way and Holly's way and stuff like that. And the last thing I'll hit on, because again, this is the core problem I see when implementation teams aren't working that well, is that they're not communicating effectively. You have to over communicate. My inside joke that I've been saying for 20 years is that the P and PM stands for pain in the ass. And even if you're not a project manager and you're an implementation manager, or you're a CSM that's doing implementations, you got to be that pain in the butt. For change management purposes, a lot of people don't like that, but just remember, you're trying to get them to their goals faster. So you shouldn't feel bad about saying, where's that file, X, Y, and Z, escalating early, because you're really trying to make sure that they're getting their money's worth. They are paying for this. And abide by the 2-week rule, which is, if we've got a 30-day implementation or a 60-day implementation or even a 91, if 2 weeks goes by and you haven't heard from the customer, like you're in a bad state. Like you something is going wrong. So if it gets to that 2-week point, like you got to start escalating and doing the stuff that you need to do and go from there. So Dave, I think we're going to need a part 2, because there's a lot of stuff we talked about and we didn't get to a bunch of it, but hopefully people found this stuff helpful. So
super helpful, Jeff. There's so much great content. I think we should do a part 2 probably in the new year, maybe touch on some other things. But what we hope, folks in the call walk away with is, even if you're a small CSM team who's tasked with doing implementation, or maybe you do have an implementation specific team, a lot of these things you can do today are scheduling and committing and templatizing. They're all things you can do today. And then certainly you look at the technology after the fact to see how you can automate it and make it more efficient. So we'll share this session. If Jeff's okay with it, we'll share these slides as well. We'll look to schedule maybe a part 2 and diving into some more things implementation specific, as Jeff certainly has a ton of content on this that he's going to be talking about in the new year. So with that, like, we'll probably end here unless any questions pop up in the chat, or the Q&A. But other than that, Jeff, thanks for joining us.
I appreciate it, and a lot of people on here, so thanks for the good questions. You know where to find me, and everybody has a great rest of the month. And you know, any questions, hunt me down on LinkedIn and ask me, or we'll try and get a second session on some of the stuff to work with your CFO and get revenue faster and some other stuff. So
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Jeff.
okay, thanks, Anya. Appreciate that.
Yep, we'll be in touch with all of you. Thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye.